BJ the Brave here, back with another episode of FORGECAST, a podcast about Warhammer 40k, WARPFORGE, and I am here with my brother-in-arms, as always, Ecclesiarch. Hello, how are you, sir?
Doing amazing, BJ. Thanks for having me once again.
Now, if you're watching the visual of this, no, Ecclesiarch hasn't lost all his hair. We are actually joined by a very special guest today as well, co-founder of EG, the team behind WARPFORGE, of course, Andreas. Andreas, welcome and thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. Very happy to be here. Thank you for the invite.
I'm just really happy we got through the kind of formal intro, and I didn't trip over my words too much. We managed to. We're on track. We're super excited to have you. I think we probably said, Ecclesiarch, didn't we? Like the first few episodes, we were saying, "Oh, wouldn't it be cool if this goes really well, and one day we actually get EG on the podcast? Wouldn't that be cool?" So this is a bit of a goal achieved for us. Thank you so much.
Pleasure.
So. So we are obviously bringing this to you a day after the roadmap has just been updated for WARPFORGE. There's been a lot of exciting things going on in the last month or two, probably since we did our last episode as well, Ecclesiarch. So we've got lots to catch up on. But yeah, Andreas, I wanted to obviously start with yourself, and most of us know Ecclesiarch played HHL before WARPFORGE and still does, and that was your kind of first game in the kind of Games Workshop IP, I believe. So what have you enjoyed most about working on this project? And how is it sort of were they things that you wanted to kind of keep the same from your experience with HHL, and what things have you tried to do differently?
Yeah. So there's a lot of things we've tried to keep, and also a lot of things that we wanted to do better. And I think probably I would highlight two things that for us were kind of a priority, and we're quite proud of. Obviously, the first one was being able to use the whole of Warhammer 40,000 universe. That was a big thing for us, because as big as the Horus Heresy setting is, well, I'm a big fan of Orkz, and obviously there's like all the scene races out there, and the Warhammer 40,000 universe is so much broader, and we were really keen to be able to do that. And the other one was to really step up in terms of the visuals and the quality and the polish, and to make it more of a AAA game. That's something that, well, we just didn't have the resources to do when we first developed Legions. And even though we kept improving things over time, it was never up to the standard that we were like envisioning. Whereas with WARPFORGE, we are quite proud of what we've been able to achieve on that front. Even though I must say it's come at the cost of having to redo an awful lot of things, which I think kind of explains why sometimes nowadays, like for example, if there is some problem, it takes us longer to fix it than it does on Legions. It's just a lot of tech that we had built to support Legions. We are having to redo very much from scratch, to bring it up to this standard. So
yeah. So not as easy to just simply reuse the assets. Did the team grow a lot between HHL and WARPFORGE?
Yes. So we used to be, I think when we released Legions, we were few. Then back when we started with WARPFORGE, I mean, we kept a team of like 6 or 7 people. But we grew that. We're 18 at the moment, plus obviously a number of contractors as well, like freelance artists, and there's some things that we outsource. But the core team for both games is 18 people, and it's not easy to split in like how many are working on each game, because a lot of people are working on both.
Yeah.
So that's the team size at the moment.
Okay. And obviously you just gave us a big giveaway in your first answer, Andreas. That's why Orkz are so busted, Ecclesiarch, because that explains everything.
I was suspicious that the developers love the Orkz. So.
Yeah, exactly. Job done. Podcast over. We figured it all out.
Might have been a factor.
Yeah. I actually was going to ask you, of the 18 people, I mean, are you all big Are you all big, like, well, first of all, Warhammer, Games Workshop fans, but are you also CCG fans? I know I saw an interview with you where I think you talked about playing Snap. Is everybody into this sort of genre?
Oh yes, absolutely. I mean the whole reason, like when we started the studio, my sister and I, we were both big fans of CCGs, like from not only digital CCGs, but they played not only Magic but a bunch of other. Big fan of Vampire, the Eternal Struggle, and a bunch of other card games. And so when we were setting up the studio and looking at what to do, this was right the time when Hearthstone was coming out of beta, and they were releasing not only on PC but also on iPad, and they said they were coming to mobile as well. Blizzard, we assume it would take them at least 10 years.
Yeah.
We were wrong on that account, but still, we decided it was a good opportunity to get into this genre and focusing on mobile first. So that's why, and that's been a bit of a shift also with WARPFORGE, whereas Legions was really a mobile first game, and we put an effort into making it run well on PC, but you can see many of the mechanics and a lot of the design decisions that we prioritize mobile. With WarpForge, we've done it more of a PC first
PC
kind of
first.
game, and so yeah, that's that. Like we just love the genre. We loved Hearthstone. We thought that from a design perspective, they had really solved many of the challenges that digital CCGs had up to that point. In our view, it was the first digital CCG that um, in our experience, it felt really native to a digital environment as
Are
opposed
you
to
talking
just
about Hearthstone?
about Hearthstone.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah.
yeah.
Okay,
And
yeah.
so we kind of obviously took a lot of their ideas. We evolved in many areas as well, but for us it was a big breakthrough for the genre. And so we thought the opportunity was there to go hard on mobile CCGs, and that's led us to here.
I've got so many questions. It's brilliant. Go on, Ecclesia, get in quick while you can.
Fair enough. So, before we get into the more spicy questions, I got one fun one. So, of all the factions so far, like that you have made in Warp Force, so we have quite a few already. Which one would you say are the most pleased with in terms of how it turned out, right? Because how fun it came out, how it came out exactly the way you want it.
Yeah, it's a tough one, that one. I think I would probably have to pick Sororitas. I think
Hmm.
really happy with how that's turned out. Um, but it's hard to say. Like for example, we really like with the Necrons, the reanimation thing. It's just the fact that it's so visual and so tangible. We think
Hmm.
that's like a really big point, even though it doesn't necessarily resemble exactly how the tabletop works. But we think that fits that lore, and visually it's um, like, especially for people who might not be so knowledgeable of the Warhammer universe, we think like it really makes this faction have like a lot of character and be quite distinct.
And
I
actually,
personally,
it's quite funny as well, that as well, because I've never thought about this until you just said it, Andreas. But if you think about any CCG, it's a very unique thing, like just visually, isn't it? This idea of like, how do you make a card like sort of crumble in on itself and then sort of stand back up? Like it's actually quite a unique. There's no other. A lot of mechanics are shared and they're given different names, Vanguard and Taunt and things like that. But that mechanic is very, very unique, isn't it, to the Necrons?
yeah.
Mm.
So we really like when some of these mechanics, like you manage. There's obviously all these um, perspectives that we have in mind when we are designing new mechanics. One of them is, well, being as faithful as possible to the lore of the army, representing like when we want players to feel like they are really playing that army when they are playing in Warpforge, right? Even if it's kind of implicit, not explicitly. So
Mm.
some army, like for example, with Sororitas, we want them almost to be like in the trailers where they are always losing at the beginning, but then they manage to pray a bit and suddenly they come back stronger and they beat back the Necrons, right? So we try to design them in such a way that they would start off like more slowly or weaker, and then become stronger over time. So we have that perspective in mind. But another one, which is very unique to digital card games, is how do we make this really visual, really intuitive? How do we come up with a mechanic? And obviously, some of them it's harder to do. But whenever we can get one right, like with the Necron reanimation, we feel really proud and happy about that.
And then you've got is it the Resorb that just reanimates
Yes.
all the remnants, and that whole screen light crackles, and yeah, I have to say, I mean, you've probably heard on videos, but I worked for Games Workshop for 8 years, and so I've been thoroughly embroiled in it. And one of the things that I absolutely think you just nailed from the start was I still love the sound effects of like the different type of bolt guns in like the Marines, like you play we'd call it a Land Raider in the game, but what's the 10 drop card? What's the 10 drop? You know what I mean, don't you?
Repulsor? You mean repulsor?
Yeah. The way it just pelts massive, giant, sort of heavy bolter shells in the card, and the sound effects and stuff. And this is all stuff, of course, that as a gamer, if you're not massive into it, you just sort of take this for granted. But it's like an Easter egg, isn't it, for real fans and people who really sort of. I was just like, oh, this is so satisfying. It's really nailed it. Really nailed it. So like when you set out, I mean, obviously Legions must have been pretty successful because it's given you the springboard to have a second go at obviously WARPFORGE. We're what 10 months in, is it 9 months into early access? Where is the game in your mind? Compared to sort of where the initial plans you had and where you sort of thought the game would be and how it would grow and stuff. How do you just sort of feel the game is kind of doing compared to where your initial expectations were at the beginning?
It's hard to say because frankly it was very difficult for us to know exactly how big this could become. The card game genre is not as massive as I think fans of it very often think it is. So even though we think it's a genre that works really well with Warhammer fans, just because like playing Warhammer and playing card games has a lot of similarities in many ways. So far it hasn't been like a runaway success, which obviously we would have hoped it to be. Like if at launch, like it would have just become viral. But for us, it's very much going in like Legions went at first, but scaled up by an order of magnitude. So in that sense, it's really good. We think that obviously right now it's not like massive player base as much as we would like. We haven't done yet like as much marketing as we're planning to do because we've been focused on first making sure that the product is solid. So there's a number of things there. We wanted to make sure, obviously, there are no bugs, and unfortunately, especially on mobile, we did have some technical issues when it was released, and we managed to fix them fairly quickly. But well, we've been dealing with a few things since then. It's just so difficult, by the way, to make this game run on all Android devices. This is something we probably underestimated, but all the tech that we've had to build for all these fancy effects that run really well on PC, but then you put that on an Android device and it's pretty hard.
Right.
So there's been a lot of work behind the scenes to try to improve as much as possible the compatibility. There's a lot of work. One thing, just to let you know, it's not something we put on the roadmap, but it actually makes a big difference. We're just about to release an update that will enable us to update things remotely in the game. Not everything, but a lot of things, and that will speed up massively whenever we have like bugs with certain cards. That's something
that is so good.
That is cool.
It's essential. It was pretty hard to do a game from scratch, but now it's working. So I'm hoping that will like speed up whenever we have any issues, the ability to fix them. And then we don't really have a very specific target or milestone for when to get out of early access, because that will be for us very much when we will like put the foot to the pedal and try to scale up the marketing and the player base. We do know for sure we want to have the alliances in there. That's always been for us kind of part of the core of the game. But that's coming soon, and then we'll have to decide, because then it's not only like is the game ready, but there's also a bit of this marketing perspective of when it's the best time to put this out, and we're likely to get the most coverage and the most visibility on Steam and all that. So
yeah, okay.
It should happen before the end of the year.
Before the end of the year, right?
Don't hold me to that, but we are expecting it to happen before the end of the year.
Now, speaking of alliances, now that you mentioned it, so as I've been playing Horus Heresy Legions, lodges was like a big thing there, one of the biggest things. Everybody's really excited for it, and everybody was very happy to see that on the roadmap. So I got a couple of questions I'd like to squeeze together. One is, since alliances are coming now, are you guys planning to have it like in a very similar fashion as HHL, or are you planning something different? And the second question would be, as alliances are coming, are there also some plans for perhaps a tournament scene? Because I remember there have been so many cool tournaments in HHL, like lodge tournaments, and we even had a world tournament, like crazy stuff. So I'd love to hear a few things about that.
Yeah. So first, regarding alliances, it will have a lot in common with Legions. But we are changing some things. Like, for example, in Legions, you can just choose any badge. Like, there's a bunch of badges or avatars that you can put for your alliance. Here, you'll have to earn them, essentially.
Oh, nice.
In a way, there will be some that are easy to earn, some others that will be linked to time events. So we are trying to spice things up a bit with that. And then we do have in mind, for when the player base is large enough, because this does require more scale, but an Alliance Wars kind of game mode. And I can't say too much about it yet, but for us, that's always been kind of the end game of where we want to take this. The challenge with alliances, and we've seen this in Legions, is that over time, especially maybe at the beginning, players are a bit more mixed, but over time you end up having a few alliances that have the most active and skilled players. And let's say the difference in what the top alliances can do versus, say, an average one, let's not even beginners, but just an average one, becomes huge. So that's why I say that having scale is important, so that you can have enough of these top alliances that can compete among them, and enough of the kind of mid-tier alliances that can compete among them, so that it doesn't become like too loop-sided, any competition among them.
Can I ask the question that perhaps a proportion of people listening to this who perhaps didn't play HHL like me might also be thinking, and it's going to be like the 5-year-old question, which is kind of like, what is alliances? I mean, Ecclesia, you've been kind of trying to explain it to me for months now, but you always end up kind of, because in your head you just know it from HHL. You always keep going, it's like HHL, and I'm like, well, I don't really play that, so I don't know what it is. And also, I don't think that I've played quite a lot of CCGs, but I don't think, from the way you've described it, there's been anything in those from where I've played. So what would you say to the layman, Andreas? Like, what would the high level, what are alliances all about?
Yeah, so essentially, it's not super sophisticated. It's quite new in the genre, but obviously many other games have these kind of clans or alliances or guilds. They are called in many different ways. It's basically an opportunity for players to band together, and you get like an exclusive chat room just for your alliance. Makes it very easy for you to share, like, for example, decks through the chat, like deck lists and things like that with your alliance, to kind of train, for example, like new people that join in. And then the advantage of
does that mean that the chat function would need updating? Because you couldn't currently do that in the current chat function, could you? I couldn't share a deck list in there.
Yeah, one part of it will be that in the chat you can choose whether to go to the global chat or to your alliance chat.
Okay.
and
Okay,
the
cool.
two will not be mixed. So it makes it easy to communicate with your alliance. And then the idea is that as an alliance, you will compete in certain game modes. And generally what we've done in Legions, and to some extent we're planning to keep in WARPFORGE, is to try to keep the ranked multiplayer more focused on just the individuals, even though there will be an alliance leaderboard, but there are no prizes there for the alliance. That's more focused on individual performance. Because we see that leaderboard is much more static if you make it alliance based. And then we focus the alliance competition in the cooperation within the alliance and competition with the other alliances, more in the draft mode, where it's a bit easier for anyone that just like comes in. They can take part in draft just like a veteran player, even if they don't have all the collection yet. And by making it time limited, well, it's not like, you cannot just rest on your past success and your skill. You have to go there and prove again that in this new draft event, you still can get a good result, right? So that's essentially it in the first phase. As I said, over time, our idea is to beef it up with having either alliance-specific game modes or at least adding an alliance dimension to the other game modes.
And I think something that Ecclesia asked, I'm not sure we spent too much time on it, but the subject of tournament play. So whether it's part of alliances or not, it's always been a really, really fun part of the CCG communities that I've been a part of in the past. And
yes.
What do you think? Is WARPFORGE suitable to that, or is it? What do you think?
So I think there's two very different aspects to that. One is the kind of tournaments that have been taking place, for example, in Horus Heresy Legions, which are just community driven. There's nothing in the game really to facilitate that other than the ability to just challenge another player directly. So those we are certainly keen to encourage for WARPFORGE as well, and that doesn't require us to add anything to the game. We're happy to provide prizes to sponsor these tournaments to try and get the scene going. But then there's an additional or another layer, which is something we are certainly looking into, which is to add the ability to organize tournaments within the game.
Oh, fantastic.
This one it's harder than it seems to organize because it requires all the participants to basically be connected at the same time. This is a bit easier when you're playing on PC and you maybe have like a 2 or 3 hour playing session. It's harder when you have mobile players that maybe join for half an hour, they sign up to the tournament and they don't realize that they are committing to playing for a couple of hours, or else they're just going to have to resign and abandon. And especially if the tournament is not too large, if people start abandoning it midway, suddenly it distorts things a lot. So we have to find the right way to do it. It's not as simple as it sounds, but we really want to add that because, as you said, we think for a lot of competitive players, committing to trying to reach the top of the leaderboard for a monthly season is hard. It's a big time commitment. But committing to a tournament that maybe lasts a few hours is much more accessible. So we know it's a big part of how CCG players.
And it shows off a different side of like they almost create their own metas. I don't know if you watched my 12-hour stream recently, but Ecclesiarch and I did a thing called Forge Clash, where essentially we did a sort of tournament format where we sort of picked 3 warlords each. You kind of got to win with all 3 of them, that type of thing. And it just I love the excitement that they create, right? If there's been a big tournament of the week and everyone's like, what were the deck lists that were used? There's, Ecclesiarch made this innovation in this Necron deck. You know, he snuck this into his Imotech deck. Everyone's trying it on ladder. Of course, it doesn't work because it's a totally different meta. You know, but it's a whole different dimension, isn't it? That doesn't quite, it's not quite there. And I was really keen to set, and I've done some, you know, I've reached out to some people in the community about a community one, but the reason why I haven't done it is that the sort of level that I want to do it in the broadcast, I haven't personally got the technical capability, but I've seen it done in other CCGs. So I want to have it so that we can commentate and we can see both players' hands. That's the big thing that I can't
Right.
figure out. Now I know it can be done because I've seen it's been done in other
Yeah.
communities, but nobody when I've tried to articulate what I'm trying to do in the WARPFORGE community, I don't think anyone's there. I thought there might be someone with that sort of technical level understanding. And if you're listening to this and you have, then please reach out to me because I'd love to get that going. But I want to do it right. I'd want it to be really cool. So yeah. The something we have talked about a lot, Ecclesiarch and I, on this podcast, is the naming of the factions. Obviously we don't. It's not just the Orkz, right? It's the Goth clan, and
Yes.
then what was the Eldar? Obviously we're saying, oh well, we're gonna get all the craft worlds because we've got. But then we weren't too sure because of how the Tau Empire and the
Sororitas
worked. So could you shed a little bit of light in terms of what was your thinking behind naming the factions?
Yes. Essentially, the intention is to leave the door open to add in another Orc army later on, which is not Goth. It's like one of the other clans and plays quite different. So we'll see whether that happens or not. We obviously have a lot of major armies still to get through before we have to go back to. I'm sure a lot of, I don't know, Mechanicum or Custodes players would be very upset if we release another Orc army before we go to one of these major factions. But we wanted to leave the door open to releasing another Necron army or another Aeldari army. That said, not all the factions lend themselves so well to this, and Sororitas is a good case in point. Where, for example, if we wanted to have the main characters from the Sororitas faction as warlords, we just didn't have much to choose from, right? So, in a way, I think just because they have less of background. I don't want to say that because there's obviously tons of novels and everything. But for example, named characters with a significant background story and known to players, or which have like a miniature to play with them in the tabletop, there just aren't that many of them.
No, they're almost like a sub-faction, aren't they, in themselves? And that's just the way it's set up in the lore, isn't it? Whereas, Space Marines, you've got all the chapters, and they're their own thing, and their own history, and their own fighting style, and their own colours and everything. Whereas, not every faction has that, do they? So
in that sense, for example, I don't think it's likely we'll have another Sororitas, like a separate Sororitas faction. We'll obviously expand it with reinforcement drops over time, but I don't think we'll create a new army for Sororitas.
Now, I do have two questions. Mostly these are like stuff that both me and BJ have been talking about. Well, the first question especially, and there has been a lot of talk about this, and I'm sure the listeners right now really want to hear about this. So the first question is, are you planning some sort of, now I totally know that right now probably you guys are super busy, but down the line, are you planning some changes to the Forge? Because for me, as an HHL player, the new Forge system with crafting was amazing. I'm just wondering, like, once you go to like level 5 cards, then you still keep getting the duplicates. So is there a plan in the future to kind of spice that up?
Yes. Well, we're looking for a solution to that. We know that's a problem. It's happened a bit earlier than we estimated when we did our internal calculations. But obviously, we understand that getting those duplicates and not having anything to do with them, that's a problem. So yes, that's something we are trying to find a solution to, but I can't promise exactly when because we haven't figured out the answer yet.
Actually, that's a good thing. It means people are playing the game a lot, because if it happens sooner than expected, that means it's working, right? And the second question, this is more like in a way, a fun question, but at the same time, a serious one. So a lot of things that I've been hearing, and actually I've mentioned myself, is that there were some cool voice lines in the beta that were removed, like for example, Grug screaming "Wah," for example. So we were wondering, like, I think, is there a plan in the future to make, like, just like in HHL, alternative arts for different warlords that you could collect through maybe
Oh.
purchases or perhaps events or so on,
Mm.
and perhaps they would get some of those voice lines, and would some of those voice lines return? Because, for example, people loved Kato Sicarius' voice line with "I'm Kato Sicarius, I will be your slayer." Like, that was so awesome. So what could you tell us about that?
Um, so yes, we're planning to do alternate arts.
Yeah.
Um,
I'd love to see that.
I don't know if that will bring back like the voice lines that have gone out of the game. I mean, the one thing that obviously from Legions you've seen this is we just try to improve things over time. Now that sometimes means as well, like obviously there's like Games Workshop has a say on a lot of these
Mm,
things as well, and like that's a good example of something where even if players love it, there's some challenges.
absolutely.
So yes, it's over time we keep improving things, and yeah, I guess sometimes some of these changes may not be necessarily liked by all players,
Of course.
but we yes, and yeah, alternate arts certainly something we're looking into as well. Yes.
Yeah, before we move on, just a quick comment. Like, in terms of like voices and so on, it has been one of mine and everybody's favorite part of the game, how well the voice acting is done for
Mm.
Oh,
both
thank you.
games. It's like top notch, especially on certain warlords, is just through the roof. Super
Yeah.
amazing for sure.
I think
BJ.
most of the things to do with the AI and you know are nailed. You know, they're really it's really high level and quite polished. I guess it's interesting. Like we're all gamers. We're sort of enjoying the game. One of the things I try to be conscious of when I'm making content, when I'm talking to the community, is it's fun in the chat. People get frustrated about things or whatever, and you think, what don't we know? Like making stuff is hard. Like, and it doesn't happen. You know, tomorrow. I mean, for example, we've done videos, we've had podcasts where we've talked about improvements and things we'd like to see, and some of those have come true, but they've come true sort of probably 4 months later because it's you're not going to listen to it and then tomorrow morning it's like the game's going to change, is it? And are there any things like that that you just kind of wish that gamers knew? Like what are the things that they might not understand that you kind of wish you kind of like them to know a little bit more in terms of what goes into?
Oh, well, I guess I certainly don't want to whine. We're having a lot of fun doing this. There is one thing which is just surprising, just how much the player base can play in just a few hours.
Mm,
I mean, and then obviously, um, very often players when we release a faction and it turns out to be a bit too powerful or a bit too weak,
mm.
our perception is that players think that was completely intentional and
Yeah.
known upfront, and it's super hard for us to know, no matter how much we try to test them, how well they will perform, especially at the top levels. Like
Mm.
you guys play better than any of us in the team, and when we see the top players in the leaderboard, we're quite amazed at the kind of combos that you come up with, how fine-tuned your decks are, and so we obviously try to test as much as possible before we release new cards. But in just 2 or 3 hours, you come up with better decks than anything we
Yeah.
were able to put together. And we have some very good players in the team, so don't get it the wrong way.
Mm.
We really try, but you count the number of PvP matches we can play, and we test against a lot of different factions. So okay, and we say, okay, what are the meta decks right now? Let's try to test this faction against those. But then in one day, you've played like 100 times more hours with this new faction. When I say
Yeah.
you, as a community, than we've been able to play ourselves. So yeah,
Yeah.
it's we do our best, but I don't think even in other bigger teams doing other card games, they are able to do much better. And
Yeah.
And we do have the advantage compared especially to physical card games that we
Oh,
can
yeah.
then go back
Oh,
and
yeah.
rebalance things.
Oh, it's brilliant, isn't it? It's brilliant.
That
I mean, I'm a Hearthstone player, and I see how messed up things are over there. So I agree. By the way, while we're at the topic, just a quick comment. I do think that the Sororitas release was super. I think BJ would agree on that, because one thing that the players actually noted, and I myself am with that, is that people prefer for the faction to be like a little bit weaker rather than super stronger. Like, so the Sororitas on release were a little bit weak, but everybody loved it. Like, everybody, including myself, I knew that the faction was not crazy strong, but I was still playing in top 50 with it, struggling, but it was fun as hell. So yeah, that's for sure
I
there.
think it's the mechanics were very good. I mean, I really liked Tau, but I also liked Tau. You know, I collected Tau armies and things like that. So I also enjoyed Tau, which were overpowered. You know, so but I think what it's more down to, and actually I think the survey that you led, Ecclesiarch, captured this quite well, which is that more down to how interesting the mechanics are. It's more down to, you know, the variety of choices and decisions that I can make at any one point, how satisfying the payoff is. Like with Sisters, I just did a video very recently on how I'd fix Sisters, and you know, one of the things I hopefully came across, I was trying to get across in that, is that the kind of ideas, the concept of mechanics are just brilliant. Like Erica could easily become my favorite warlord because the ideas are there, but I don't think like the full execution's there yet. So like, you know, I'd have some games where I'd end up with 12 faith and I'd no payoff. And we were talking about this, weren't we, Ecclesiarch? And we were saying, oh, you know, maybe we should put the Exorcist in, and we were like, yeah, but 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 then you've got, for every game you get the Exorcist, you get that faith, and you get the Exorcist off. You're gonna have 5 games where you've got 6 or 7 faith, and you've just got this pretty much dead card in your hand. So like the idea, the concept is sort of there, but the exit is just a little bit of like, I think, fine tuning on how do you get that right balance of the payoff on the faith versus the build up of the faith. Like, you know, the units that are really good at praying tend to be the cheaper ones, right? Because early game, you're not so bothered about sacrificing attacking with a smaller unit. But if you drop a 7-drop, you can't afford to not swing with its 6/6 stats, right? Because you're at a point of the game where you might only get to swing 2 or 3 more times before someone loses. So you can't afford to take the turn off. So therefore, we wanted the late game cards to kind of have the payoff of the faith. Yeah, anyway, without going down a rabbit hole, I agree. I do think the Sisters were really really well executed. And something else that I wanted to pick up on as well, you know, because I hear a lot from the community, and we've been asked to ask you this question as well today about would you ever consider involving the community or having like a closed beta group? But I will say this for listeners, as I remember I played Gwent quite religiously. I was right in the pioneer stage. Like, I played that whole way through Gwent, and they did that. They created a beta, and they invited a lot of top players. They probably had about 100, 150 players in this beta group. And even with that, and they had some great players in that beta group, so they really understood the game. But I think that CD Projekt Red also still experienced what you articulated, Andreas, which is that even with 150 great players, that doesn't give you the kind of data and the kind of testing that once something is out there and thousands of players can play it, and so many games can be played in 2 hours, and then everyone can talk about it on Discord and then make iterations, and it has this kind of like chaos effect. So the feedback loop is so exponential that even with a beta group, don't get me wrong, a beta group might be better than sort of 15 people testing it, but it probably won't give perhaps what the community thinks, which is that, oh, if we have a beta group, we're suddenly going to have this really well balanced, really well polished, we're going to have solved all the problems. No, you're not. You're not. It's not going to work like that.
Not as easy. Not as easy. Andreas, before you answer it, just one quick sentence to put in there. Like, definitely, I agree with BJ. It would be cool to see something similar down the line, because lately we've been having a lot of active contact with EG, and we've been exchanging information and stuff, and that's been so helpful having the communication. And we totally get that it's really hard to have good communication on Discord where everything is going crazy. So this kind of type of thing would definitely be a good help, I would assume. So are you planning something down the line for this? Like, that's the main question, basically.
On on the beta tester,
Yeah,
sorry.
beta or other type of communication, like platform or something like that.
So okay, so that's a very different question. On the server, having the server for like a bigger testing group, it's something that we've thought about. We just feel it's going to be a bit hard to pull it off properly. And I'll be honest, one of the challenges we sometimes face is that even if we have the majority of the content ready early so that we can be testing things and all that, there's always something that gets stuck somewhere, whether it's like a voice line that just isn't right and we have to keep like working on it, or it's some VFX or something. There's always something that's kind of last minute. And so we fear that if we want this to have like the final version, it just adds this extra time that we have to allow before the content can go live. That may be hard sometimes to slot in. And second, this is more of a personal thing, but it feels slightly unfair to let, because you'll be getting probably like a lot of the best players, and if you give them this extra time to play with the cards, to think of their deck, it feels like you are giving them like an extra advantage, right? Once the content comes live. So there's that dimension as well that worries us a bit.
Yeah.
So that's not to say it won't happen.
It's just difficult.
It's not an easy win. It's not as simple as it sounds. And then in terms of the communication with the community, that's a challenging topic just because of the amount of time. So we really value having the feedback from players, and I think it's often the problem is not listening to it, it's just we are overwhelmed in a way with feedback, right? It's and we try our best to learn from it and distill it, and so we look at all the feedback that we get through Discord. We try to watch all the videos that you put out and others, and we try to stay on top of how the community is feeling. And it's the fact that we don't do something doesn't mean we don't agree with a lot of the suggestions. As you said, sometimes it's something we agree and we would like to do as well, but we just cannot find the time to do it until later on. We always have this struggle between improving things that are out there, putting out new content, and putting out new features or other kinds of improvements. There's always like, we want to do more things than we can realistically do, and we just have to say, okay, let's obviously the content, by the way, tends to take priority over everything else, so we want to keep a healthy pipeline of new content. We think that's essential, but at the same time we want to be putting out like the alliances, improving the ranking system. There's a lot of other features that we have in mind. And by the way, I just want to add, there's more stuff coming than what's on the roadmap.
Yeah.
There are just some things.
This year? Do you mean this year or?
I mean this year.
Oh,
yeah,
okay, cool.
we are working on more things for this year. They're just not easy to put in a couple of words that people will understand. So we prefer to just wait. Sometimes we're not sure exactly how long they are going to take. So we prefer to wait until we are closer to releasing them and then do a proper announcement where we can explain how it's going to work.
Yeah. I really sympathize with what you're saying there about the beta community. I guess it's all about like how can we help, and I think I really appreciate it, and I think the community have really appreciated whenever they've seen that like EG have sort of listened to feedback, and it's not like you know, we got to be. It's not like an entitled thing. Oh, we gave feedback, so everything's got to change exactly as we said it. But I think it just feels really nice that obviously you've got your formal marketing, which is kind of like push communication and telling us, and that can be great and it can be exciting. But it's not that kind of like transparent, trust building, two-way comms. And like, I'd love to see something like, you know, dev diaries or this week in WARPFORGE or something where it's like, you know, the devs just chatting to the phone for 10 minutes, just saying, hey guys, you know, we've had some really cool, we had a really great week at EG. We've had some really cool feedback from things. You know, some of the things we can't do. We really love this idea, but here's some of the things you know. So it's almost like it's
Yeah.
not about telling us what's coming, but it's almost like a window in, and I think it's more about building that like transparency between the community. And anyway, yeah. So, but I do think it's been great. The best example of it was the U-turn that you took on the Tyrannid. Was it the Neurothroat Ecclesiarch? The Neurothroat ability in January?
Together with the Genes to Win, I made the panic video. I remember
Yeah,
that.
yeah. But that was brilliant because that would have been so easy, you know, for a lot of companies to sort of go, well, we've said it now, we're not going to go back you know. But that was like a real. I just thought that was just that stands out for me as like a, and that was when I sort of went, okay, they really are listening. That you know,
Yeah,
they've made the right decision. They've got it there. Yeah.
And if I may
absolutely.
say, like the questionnaire that you ran was really helpful. I know it's not like a two-way communication; it's still just one way. But the fact that you distilled like a lot of this feedback in a kind of way that it was easy to see, like how the community was prioritizing a lot of these points, that's really useful. And one other point I just want to throw in is very often I know it can feel when people are complaining about something like the whole player base thinks the same way, but it may not be the case.
No.
There are many instances where you change something because a lot of players are requesting that, and then that's when you find out that there's another bunch of people who actually prefer it how it used to be. So yeah, it's that one is it depends. There are things where I agree, like most people will be happy to see, but there's very often things that just and it makes sense because it's not just a matter of personal preference, but very often the experience of a very skilled player who's put in a lot of hours to compete for the top of the ranking is very different to that of someone who's playing it much more casually, maybe on the phone. They are just playing the game in a very different way, and so the things that they prioritize or care about might be quite different.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. No, 100% get that. And often that, and often they are those voices really matter, right? Because you know, having a game with 15 really great players, that's not going to be good enough, is it? So, um, I wanted to ask you, Andreas. I mean, look, the roadmap came out yesterday, and there's one thing on there that I am personally massively excited about, and I really want to hear a little bit more. And it's not the redacted section. It's actually the new ranking system.
Yes.
Because I mean, I don't know how much you personally listen to the podcast, but just about every episode I go on about the pro ladder in Gwen, and I'd love to talk to you about that,
Okay.
but I just think this game's got so much potential for the ladder system and everything, and I just want to know, what can you tell us about that, and also what are you hoping that the new system will you know, will kind of achieve, if you like, and enhance the experience for gamers.
So we are not too happy with how ranking is working at the moment, and there's a couple of like there's basically a very small percentage of the player base that's playing in ranked mode, and that's not what we want. We would want most people to be playing in ranked mode, and so the new ranking system will do a lot of things. Our main inspiration, I think you'll be happy to hear, is Gwent actually.
The Pro League.
Yes. We've been looking a lot at how they've been doing things, and so we are trying to get rid of. So we're trying to achieve different things. First, we're trying to remove the incentive that many people feel right now not to play ranked. Okay, there's right now we feel both those people who have maybe reached a fairly high ranking and they don't want to risk losing it.
They're
So maybe
camping. They're just camping.
exactly. So we want to try to remove that disincentive to play ranked. We want to make it easier for people to try new decks. One thing that we don't like is the fact that, hey, you may have this deck that works really well. You have this idea for another deck that you think will work, but how do you actually test it at a high level without risking your rank, right?
Yes.
And we also want to add more opportunities for people to set up like their own goals to some extent. So where I'm going with all of this, and if you've played Gwent, I think you'll be familiar with this, is to basically try to create separate rankings for each of the factions, so that say say you like
Oh my god, I want
FORGECAST,
this tomorrow, Andreas. I want this tomorrow.
yeah, and then still have obviously like an overall leaderboard,
Yeah.
which is in a way a combination of how you've been doing with the different armies.
Yeah.
This will also incentivize people to play with different armies, which we think now at this point it's a good thing. I'm sure some people will disagree with this, and they just want to play Black Legion, and they will be very upset if they cannot be the #1 in the world just by playing Black Legion. So we are expecting that to annoy some players. But we think it's fair that the top player in the world is someone who has proven they can play with more than
They're
one
better at WARPFORGE.
faction.
And that's what Gwent did with the that's why I thought it worked well, because that system only applied to legendary players. So if you were new and you just built a Black Legion collection, yeah, of course you haven't got 4 competitive factions because you haven't played long enough to even collect the cards. But the Pro League, it was like if you're hitting legendary every season, can. And I was just listening to your goals there, 4 things, and I was thinking, yeah, the Pro League would do that. Yep, it would achieve that. Yeah, it would achieve that. Ecclesiarch, you didn't play very much, did you, when the Tower came out? Because, and I heard a lot of people say, oh, the Tower really broke, and and I played to high heaven because I was really enjoying the faction, and I'd gone deep on it, and I got all the cards. But the Pro League would get around that, right? Because you'd be like, okay, so Tower broken, but you need to get 3 other faction scores. So what are you doing for your Necrons this season? What are you doing for your thing? And you can set your own personal goals. Oh, God, it's going to be brilliant. It's going to be brilliant.
So, yeah. By the way, now that you mentioned the Tau, and yeah, I'm sorry that they were quite like so strong when they came out. One thing I was going to say, even though we can fortunately like go back and change things, it's hard when a faction has just come out and you have a lot of people who have spent a lot of money to collect all these cards to suddenly go and nerf them.
Yeah.
It's much easier if the faction is a bit weak, like happened with the Sororitas. It's much easier to go quickly and buff them a bit. But nerfing, if the faction turns out to be too strong, it obviously gets like a big backlash from the people who have been, whether they've spent money or not, they've just put the effort to collect the faction, to build the deck, and suddenly you go very quickly and nerf it. That's bit nasty as well. So that's why it's hard sometimes to correct these issues very fast.
Yeah. Well, you've done quite a few now. The reinforcement drops. You've done 2 full new factions, I think, since early access, in the Tau and the Sororitas. Have you learned any lessons in terms of just how to do new releases? And a kind of tag on to that question is specifically about reinforcements, because we see in the roadmap you've got a number of reinforcements come in. What did you learn from the Chaos one recently, where you turned it into more of a raid? What worked, what didn't, and what should we expect from future reinforcements?
Yeah, well, I mean, you tell me, did you enjoy the raids?
I loved most of it for sure. It's like I remember like it was very cool when we had them in HHL when we were upload, like we were unlocking some awesome warlords like Lord of the Flies and other stuff. So that is certainly a cool thing, a thing that you can work for, especially like players are just working for it. The only thing that usually it had a little question mark just to deliver the feedback from the player base was that okay, but like they were saying Orkz got all their legendaries, so if we don't complete the track, then the Galorant champion has to be lost. So that was probably the thing that was under question. Why do they get special treatment? But we already established that EG loves Orkz, so I guess that's.
So, I mean, the answer, even though there's that as well, the answer is we just didn't come up with this raid mechanic in time for the first reinforcement drops, and so. The plan is to keep doing these kind of raids. One thing we may do is make them a bit shorter. so that instead of lasting almost 2 weeks, or I think it was like 13 days last time, something like that, would probably make them more closer to a week. And we may change the format over time slightly, because even though we quite like the rates and we feel like they go down quite well with the player base, we don't think it's a format that can happen like too often, because otherwise they also lose a bit of their fun, right, if it's happening all the time. So the idea is to do other types of events as well, like for example, like focused on the draft mode that I mentioned earlier, especially when the alliances are out. So yeah, the plan in the short term, essentially, ultramarines, yes, there will be a raid for them. Later reinforcement drops, we will see over time. We don't have that decision taken yet. The idea is to learn from how we see players reacting, and I have to say, our intention. So we don't create new content just to tease players, saying, "Look, there's this fantastic legendary card that you might get, but we'll take it away from you." So we prefer if players get it, right? But at the same time, there has to be the chance of not getting it for the whole thing to actually have any meaning. So it's when we calculate the points, we try to make it achievable, but at the same time not guaranteed, because then there's no reason to take part, essentially.
But couldn't it? But I get that. I get the consequence piece, but surely there's a way of the consequence not be the card will never enter the game. Like, could the consequence just be you can't get it? You didn't get it on the raid, so now you're going to have to, it falls back into the kind of thingy system. And so it essentially the consequence to the player base would be is going to take you longer to get it through that means, as opposed to if you'd all got it, worked together on the raid, you would have got it earlier. I don't know. Yeah. I just felt there's got to be a way of the consequence not being that here's this great legendary, but it never got released. There's got to be some middle ground. There's got to be something.
So we're listening to these things. As I say, it's not like we've already defined like this is how raids will always work, and there's no chance to change that. We're learning, and we want them to also be slightly different every now and then, and like introduce some novelty. So yeah, we will think about that and see if we can come up with a better approach. But one thing that we did in Legions, and we are trying to bring to WARPFORGE as well, is this idea that when you're playing in some of these events, you're on the one hand competing at an individual level. You're obviously trying to get your rewards. We are trying to add this second layer of you're competing for your alliance as well. But we want to add one third layer, which the events in Legion have, which is that you are competing to influence the game itself. It's not just you or your alliance, but you are actually influencing what gets unlocked, or whether a faction gets like a new piece of content or not.
Okay, I see.
This is always a bit controversial. We know, because every time like one faction gets a new piece of content, it means another doesn't, and some players probably prefer that one. But we think that having this extra layer of like how actually influencing the game is really cool.
No, I mean, it's super fun. It always was cool in Legions when we got like choice between two warlords or legendaries, and I remember how happy I was when we actually got Castro and not Melina. Like I was like going crazy because it was so close. It was like 50-50, and suddenly it edged it a bit. And then Castron was my favorite sister's warlord. So yeah, totally cool. I like that.
I definitely felt with the Chaos reinforcement, it added a lot more meaning as a player. I'd got the Gordrang, I'd got the Terror, but it was almost like, yeah, here's 10 you get cards, probably bought them and just, and obviously I had fun with them and got on with them, made decks and everything, but the actual collecting actually is something that I miss, and something that we always talk about when the new factions come out. It's just fantastic having that premium campaign for a few weeks, isn't it? Like, because it brings that feeling back of collecting again. So I do think the overall concept of the raid was a massive step forward, and it brought more meaning to the reinforcements. Yeah, some of the execution, you keep learning, you keep refining it. Obviously, wasn't perfect, but I think the concept definitely brought a lot more meaning to the reinforcement drop. And I'm sure you guys must have seen on the data as well. Like, you must have got a lot more engagement and stuff in that
Yeah,
raid and stuff, which is really
yeah,
cool. Yeah.
yeah. Ultimately, so this is a balance where with Legions, when we released, we went very hard on from day one with these time limited events.
Mm.
And on the one hand, that's great because they are really fun, and I think they in Legions what we did was the draft, like time limited draft events where there's like a certain set of warlords, and then 2 weeks later it will be a different set of warlords that are there. And the challenge there is that these obviously take quite a bit of time to prepare. So when we're spending like a significant amount of our development time on all these what we call life ops, life operations of creating all these time events, well, that's time that we cannot spend on new features or create like improving the game in some other ways.
Mm.
So with WarpForge, what we've decided is to introduce them a bit more gradually. We still
Mm.
want to get to that kind of intensity where there's something quite unique and exciting going on all the time, but we just didn't want to commit from day one to spending a lot of time on that.
Ah, okay. I see. Very cool, very cool. We did have a bunch of community questions, which a lot of you've already answered, Andreas. But if I could maybe just fire a couple of like really quick fire ones at you, which I don't think we've touched on. So obviously some warlords like Swarmlord has like 3 melee attack, 1 range. Any plans to sort of mess with the kind of melee and range attack, and also the health, right? We have 35 and 40, but Ecclesiarch says HHL has all sorts of variants. Any thoughts around that?
Yes, yes, we plan to play around a bit with that. Not very often, so we try just because it's very hard to balance.
Mm.
Like warlords, which have like Swarmlord, it's a good example. It can very easily go overboard. So we will try to keep that for unique cases where it really fits. Like
Mm.
I don't know, say a Crut or say like someone having something slightly different. But in general, it will be the exception rather than the norm.
Right. I was very surprised that Onvar was a 2-2. I thought he was going to be like 0 melee, 0 range. He just gets a shield every turn or something. I don't know. Okay, so you are going to have the variants, but perhaps not as adventurous as with Legions, because you want to kind of make it more of a kind of unique exception. Friends being able to watch live matches like in Hearthstone. So if those guys are friends on our friends list, I can kind of dive in and watch your game late early. Have you familiar with that obviously because you played
Yeah.
Hearthstone? Is that doable?
Uh, it's very hard.
Is
It's
it?
something
Yeah.
that we've wanted to do in Legions as well for a very long time. It technically is quite hard just because of how we've built the whole game. It's just
Mm,
a huge investment. So it's something that we want to do, but it's fine. It is hard to find the time for it,
okay.
to be very honest.
I know you play Marvel Snap because I think I heard that on a previous interview that you did. One of the cool things they do in their shop is you can pin a card. So, if the
Yeah.
Necron Lord comes in today and I can't afford it, I don't have the crystals yet, maybe I'm halfway there, but I really, really want the Necron Lord. Could we have is that an easy thing to implement? Some sort of like you can pin the card and it doesn't move until I buy it?
Possibly, yeah. No, that's something we've discussed at some point.
Hmm.
I'll make a note just to see where it is on the
Yeah,
priority
you,
list.
you you know what I'm talking about, don't you? 'Cause you've played
Yes.
Snap, haven't you? So yeah. And then another one which is really interesting. Again, having played in a lot of different CCGs in the past, it's one of the reasons I got into content creation actually, is because I couldn't find the community content that I wanted as a gamer, so I kind of wanted to make it. But some of the I think it was Barry cashed this one actually around how um, can we get a community accessible API for collected game stats so that someone else can put together very nice like live data trackers and build? I mean, Legends of Runeterra, they've got a really great fan led site that there's all sorts where it's pulling the data and it's showing meta reports like hourly, and it shows you like decks and percentage. It's unbelievable, and it's all just fan made. I think it's because they've got access to
Yeah.
that. What do you think?
Yeah, no, absolutely. This is something we've worked on a bit in the past. We just haven't figured out the right way to do it, and in a manner that is that doesn't take too much effort afterwards for us to keep it up to date. So the challenge with this is always not just creating like the first data set, it's how to keep it updated when things are changing
So it's
all
a
the time.
maintainability issue.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so we haven't sorted this out yet, but it's something we've been meaning to do for quite some time as well. Yes.
Yeah. And I think something that EG themselves put out in your early comms, but I'm gonna hold your feet to the fire on this one a little bit because I don't think it's quite panned out this way. Is I think you actually said that when you do this sort of end of month news article where you do your sort of meta stats and everything, that it was going to line up with basically when you do the patch. Because we even went back and checked this at one point, didn't we, Ecclesia? And there was a comms an article that said that, but it never has. So last month was I think a good example where the meta stats that you were showing was actually pretty confusing to people because it had data from
Data from the overpowered time of the Tau, and then
yeah,
suddenly they
that's
get
right.
nerfed for the
So there was
second half.
so there was the balance patch included in it. Then there was a new release included. So you had these like stats that showed, for example, the Tau were just smashing everything, and it was like, if you were coming into the game and saw when that was reported, you'd think Tau were amazing. It was like, no, they went through a massive nerf halfway through these stats, and that's influenced it and stuff.
So generally, I can't remember exactly with this one, but generally, when the balance patch happens fairly early in the season, we take the stats only after the balance patch. We generally do that. Now, obviously, that doesn't work so well if there's, for example, a new release and it changes the meta.
Yeah.
But I can't remember exactly in this case, but yeah, so the meta report doesn't necessarily take like from day one of the season.
Yeah.
And that's why we also try to obviously make the balance patch as early as possible after the season changes, and then we'll take the stats after that.
Got you.
I can't remember exactly with the Tau. We may have done something like midway.
And do they include bot data?
No.
Okay, so they are. It's purely based on human games.
We clean that up exactly because otherwise it distorts the picture very much.
Got you. Yeah, because Gazgul he's a troublesome bot. He's one that I lost to a few times. Just like it just showed how good Orkz were that that we'd regularly lose to the Gazgul box. Like how he's still got Will of Gork. It's like just destroyed my board.
Yeah, the AI of the bots is a funny one, where we could work to make them better, and I know that especially at the top ranks that would obviously be a good thing, but in the bottom ranks, and especially for new players, they don't want to be beat by a bot. If we make them too good, it will actually discourage new players.
Have you seen what Shadowverse do with that, actually, with the bots? I don't know if you've played Shadowverse, so that you can actually choose the level of the bot that you want to play. So and that's the other thing as well, is being able to choose which bot you play would be really cool, because I was trying to do a stream on Sisters, and I was trying to show off the new Fave system.
Yeah.
So I'm like, oh, I've got Uriel. So basically, every time a Warlord prays and the units that are next to them, Uriel just uses his hero power every turn and destroys my. And I literally drew into Uriel 4 bots in a row, and I was like in practice mode. And so I'm just trying to practice this mechanic. So yeah, what Shadowverse do is they first of all let you choose which Warlord you want to play against, and then it gives you, it's almost like, do you want to fight a kind of novice Gordrang, an intermediate Gordrang, or a super advanced Gordrang? Which is pretty cool, because if you are trying to test for a meta or something as well, you can like really try and figure out, I'm going to play the advanced Gordrang and see if I can figure something out.
That makes sense. Yeah, I mean the what we have, I think we have this in Warpforge as well. We certainly do in Legions, the ability to play against your own deck. Obviously, doesn't improve the decision making of the AI,
Oh,
but at
that'd be cool.
least you can control which deck you're playing against, which warlord and which deck list. So right now, I don't know for sure whether we have that in Warpforge, but if not, that's something we can probably add quite easily.
I suppose the other thing that came through the community, and I was umming and ahhing about whether to ask this, but I guess the best way to put it is that I guess some people are maybe a little bit confused sometimes about the pricing strategy, and they don't quite know,
Mm.
you know. I mean, without going into War and Peace on it, I mean, is there anything that you kind of want people to sort of know or understand about what goes into like that and the pricing strategy? And are you still testing stuff and price points and things?
Yes, we are testing things. So pricing is very difficult because just like the perception of different people is so different.
Mm,
So I know when we put out, for example, I think the most extreme case when we put out the cosmetic shop at the beginning when the game first came out in early access, it had like this cosmetic shop with pretty high prices. We're aware that they are pretty high prices, but in a free to play game, there's obviously a majority of players that will never spend a dime, and
mm,
that's fine. And there's players who will spend a few tens or a few hundreds of dollars, and then there's players who are willing to spend thousands
mm,
of dollars, even if it feels awkward to many other people.
mm.
And you have to put up like they have to have things they can spend it on.
Mm.
And so we certainly
Like
weren't.
Warpforge jumpers, for example.
For example, that's a so the thing is when with pricing the problem is it's almost if you think about clothes like
Mm,
the fashion industry, like you can get a t-shirt like very cheap or you
yeah.
can get a t-shirt for as much money as you want.
Yeah.
Essentially there's no limit to how expensive clothes can be. Will argue challenge here is just you have the same price for everyone, and the perception of that price is extremely different.
Yeah.
So we are not trying to like we don't have, essentially we don't have the answer to
Yeah.
what's the right price. It's something that we have to test and see at what price points people or enough people are willing to buy things.
Mm,
And obviously, in a system where we want the game to be playable by everyone, whether they are willing to spend money in the game or not, because
mm.
we like the game wouldn't work just with spenders.
No.
There just aren't enough people willing to spend anything at all. So we want to make sure that players who don't spend money feel like they can have fun, that they can collect the cards, that they can be competitive, but at the same time, if someone is willing to spend the money, like having things that they can spend it on, and some of them will be pricey, especially if they are cosmetic items, we feel like that doesn't distort the game, the competitive aspect of it.
Mm,
So um,
mm. You need to get some
it's
premium. You need to get premium. What's it called? What's the Vilgefortz? What's that called? Animated? Is it?
Animated ones,
Yeah,
right?
the animated premiums. Yeah. Oh man, so cool.
Oh,
yeah.
Wilgefortz.
Can you imagine that in 40K? That'd be super. Yeah.
So yeah, that's it's a tough topic, that one,
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
because people will have such a different perception of
Yeah.
whether something is expensive or not, and yeah.
Mm. And I forgot to ask this earlier, but it was one as well, which was around the when you were talking about the roadmap and sort of when you see them coming out of early access, and you were talking about different releases coming in. I mean, you talk about growing the player base and things. I mean, have you seen, for example, new releases? Are they, as we might assume, acting as like a big springboard to kind of getting new players or generating just more play within the game? Do you guys see
Yeah.
that in the data?
Yeah, absolutely. I
Mm,
mean, every time we release a new faction, it's a big marketing opportunity. It allows us to reach new players and also re-engage players who may have played before but maybe have stopped playing for a while. And then when they see that there's new content, they come back to try it. So yeah, every like content new content is essentially our best marketing tool.
Yeah, yeah. And is that true of reinforcements as well, or less so? Because I would imagine the
Less,
tower and the sisters were like a big.
yeah, it's much less so. Yeah, exactly. So the reinforcements, they have helped, but for the most part, they are more for the current players rather than a way to bring in more players.
Okay. And who is the best WARPFORGE player on the team? Who should we be looking out for on ladder, Ecclesiat?
Oh, I would say I don't know. Who's the undercover EG player?
Yeah. What are all your usernames on the game? Secret Sniper 501. It's like.
No, I won't say, but yeah, obviously most of the team does play the game. Some of them play really well, and also at work, some of them like their work is to actually play the game, so they get a lot of practice. So yeah, we have some strong players.
Some strong players with hidden names. We'll never know.
Yes.
Well, I just want to say it's been an absolute pleasure. I'm conscious of time. I think we've gone a little bit over, Andreas, and I just want to say massive thanks for coming on. And we'd love to have you on again in down the line and sort of catch up and how things are going. I hope you've enjoyed hanging out.
Absolutely. It's been great. Thank you so much for having me. And yeah, I would love to be back in a while when we have new things to talk about.
Maybe before Christmas.
Yeah, definitely. I am all I can think about, just so you know, like the immediate feedback is all I can think about is the new ranking system. That is like I am so hyped for that. So
yes, let's see. It's such yeah, I mean just a parting thought. It's very often it's very hard to predict how players will react, and especially over time. Like some dynamics get settled. Like for example, one thing we're seeing is a lot of people playing in practice just to finish the daily missions.
Yeah.
And on the one hand, it's great that that option exists. It was intentional. We want to make it easy, especially for people who may only play on the phone for a few minutes at a time. We wanted it to make it very easy for them to come in and complete the missions, but we didn't want it to become the main way of completing the missions. And obviously, once it's happening, it's not so easy to change that behavior, especially like we could somehow, for example, we could say, okay, practice doesn't count toward missions, but then all we would be doing is to potentially lose a lot of those players because they cannot play the way they want anymore. So instead of that, we're thinking of ways to incentivize the other game modes, so that you can still play practice if you really don't have the time for a ranked match. But hey, you really like if you can, you should really be playing ranked match, right? So it just takes time to really figure out how to change some of these things. But we're in this for the long run.
That's super exciting. And the same applies for when you're streaming, right, Ecclesiat? Like when I mean, Ecclesiat's a good example because I think you were like top 8 or something last season, and then Sisters came out, and he really wanted to play Sisters, but on stream. But then he was like, "Well, I can't." Everyone was saying to him in chat, "Go on ranked." And he's like, "I don't even know what I'm doing. I've just spent hours getting here with Abaddon or whatever. I'm not just suddenly going to pick up this new warlord. I don't even know what the card does yet, and jump into the top 10. I'm gonna."
And I did, and I was 60 after like 1 hour.
You're a brave man.
It was fun though.
You're
it was fun though.
You're a brave.
It was fun.
Plus 10 courage points.
So hopefully, the new ranking system should help a lot with that. I think.
Fantastic.
Absolutely.
Oh my god, I can't wait. Can't wait for that. Is there anything, Andreas, before we sign off? Is there anything we haven't asked you that you kind of want to let people know about, or that you're particularly, even personally, quite excited about, or any parting thoughts?
No, I guess a couple. First, well, a big thank you to both of you and to everyone who puts out content for the game, because you really help like bring the community alive. And I know it's a massive help for new players who come into the game to have all that content explaining like how to play different factions and decks, the good decks and the strategy. So thanks a lot for that.
Thank you.
And yeah, we really value like also the people who organize tournaments or who are on the Discord, just helping the community be alive, right? Even if they are just making like memes or whatever it is, just like we're really happy because ultimately we're making this for people to play it, right? So when we see those reactions, even when sometimes it's like negative reactions, we still appreciate that there's people who don't care, don't bother making even negative comments. So we know that people who are there, it's because they care, they're enjoying it. So we're really grateful. And yeah, the other thing is what I mentioned earlier. We're in this for the long run. So I know that there may be things in the game that perhaps are a bit frustrating or things that you would like to see. And some of them may take forever to happen, unfortunately, but we are doing our best to keep improving the game and not only releasing new content, but also new features and improving the bugs and going back if there's some army that isn't working as intended or that people are not enjoying, well, trying to go back and do a rework and getting it to be fun again. So yeah, just keep sending us your thoughts. We'll do our best to both like process them and also do what we can about them. And yeah, it's looking forward to everything that's on the pipeline and the roadmap and a lot more things that we haven't announced yet, but that we are working on as well.
Oh, fantastic. Well, we really appreciate your kind words, and we'll obviously continue to work with you and be a bit of a bridge with the community, and I'm sure we'll do more feedback and things like that down the line. So yeah, once again, massive thanks for today. It's been cool hanging out and getting to know you a bit, Andreas, and I look forward to the next one. Guys, we are only doing a one-part episode today, so there's no need to kind of switch channels. Obviously, go and check out the Ecclesiarch's channel. He doesn't just do the WARPFORGE content, but also HHL. So go and like and subscribe there. Obviously, like the video if you've enjoyed this, and let us know in the comments if there are any things that we've talked about today that you've kind of got thoughts on, or if there's any questions perhaps that we missed. Then we'll capture those for next time. But until then, we'll see you in the next one. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.